Ever wonder why certain masterpieces vanish while mediocre films become classics? One director on this list was nearly murdered over his film's political message. Another bankrupted an entire studio with a vision so ambitious executives called it career suicide. These 15 cinematic treasures from the 1960s aren't just good, they're revolutionary films Hollywood deliberately buried. 1. The Swimmer, 1968. Imagine swimming through your neighbor's pools and discovering your entire life is a lie. Burt Lancaster strips down and dives deep into suburban hell in this mind-bending journey through the American dream gone wrong. The film starts simply. A successful businessman decides to swim home through every backyard pool in his affluent neighborhood. With each plunge, the facade of his perfect life cracks wider. Lancaster's physicality is mesmerizing. His body becomes a landscape of deterioration as his character's delusions unravel. Behind the scenes, production was a disaster. Director Frank Perry was fired halfway through, replaced by Sidney Pollack, who reshot nearly half the film. Lancaster and screenwriter Eleanor Perry reportedly screamed at each other daily, with Lancaster later calling it the most demanding role of my career. Critics dismissed it as pretentious garbage in '68. Roger Ebert later reversed his initial negative review, calling it a film about a man who confronts his delusions and chooses to die rather than live with them. It bombed spectacularly at the box office, nearly bankrupting Columbia Pictures' art film division. The Swimmer's surreal examination of masculine fragility and suburban emptiness feels more relevant now than it did in the '60s. Modern filmmakers from Paul Thomas Anderson to Ari Aster cite it as fundamental inspiration. This isn't just a forgotten film. It's a lost prophecy about American self-deception. 2. Seconds, 1966. A middle-aged banker pays a shadowy corporation to fake his death, surgically transform his appearance, and give him a fresh start as a handsome artist. Sounds like freedom, right? Wrong. It's the beginning of a nightmare. Rock Hudson delivers the performance of his career, miles from his romantic comedy image, as a man trapped in a stranger's skin. John Frankenheimer's direction is relentless, turning everyday scenes into claustrophobic horror. Those beach party sequences, shot with distorting lenses that make carefree revelry look like a cult ritual. James Wong Howe's Oscar-nominated cinematography uses fisheye lenses, disorienting angles, and handheld camera work that was revolutionary for mainstream cinema. The opening transformation sequence still appears in film school textbooks as a masterclass in psychological horror. The studio demanded a different ending. Frankenheimer refused. The result? Paramount buried it. Audiences at Cannes reportedly booed it, and the film vanished from theaters in weeks. The director later said, "I was told I'd never work again if I didn't change it. I'm proud I didn't." Now considered the third in Frankenheimer's Paranoia trilogy with The Manchurian Candidate and 7 Days in May, Seconds asks questions about identity and authenticity that feel tailor-made for our social media era. This isn't just a film about changing your face, it's about the impossibility of escaping yourself. 3. Petulia, 1968. A divorced doctor meets a manic married socialite who announces she intends to sleep with him. Then things get weird, really weird. Director Richard Lester fractures time, jumping between past, present, and future without warning, mirroring the disorientation of San Francisco's 1968 counterculture. Julie Christie's Petulia isn't just quirky, she's damaged, desperate, and fleeing an abusive marriage. George C. Scott's surgeon is emotionally dead, going through the motions of life. Their relationship isn't romantic. It's two drowning people briefly clinging to each other. The film's kaleidoscopic editing technique influenced generations of filmmakers. Nicholas Roeg reportedly studied it, frame by frame, before making Don't Look Now. The Big Brother and the Holding Company with Janis Joplin and Grateful Dead performances weren't staged. Lester simply filmed actual concerts, creating a documentary fiction hybrid decades before it became common. Mainstream critics trashed it. Pauline Kael called it a film of fragments. The marketing department had no idea how to sell it, releasing posters that suggested a romantic comedy. It died at the box office within weeks. Petulia captures the exact moment the utopian dreams of the 60s began to curdle. The film juxtaposes Haight-Ashbury hippie idealism with scenes of shocking domestic violence and emotional emptiness. It's the American dream and the American nightmare presented simultaneously, with cutting precision that still draws blood today. 4. Mickey 1, 1965. A stand-up comedian flees Detroit for Chicago, convinced the mob wants him dead. But is anyone actually chasing him, or is he running from himself? Warren Beatty plays Mickey, a man trapped in permanent panic mode, perpetually looking over his shoulder. Director Arthur Penn crafts a fever dream of paranoia, using techniques from French New Wave cinema years before they became fashionable in Hollywood. Jazz legend Stan Getz provides a score that feels like musical anxiety attacks, dissonant saxophones following Mickey through rain-slicked alleys. The film features a surreal junkyard ballet, literally modern dancers performing among burning debris and mechanical monsters, that cost nearly a quarter of the movie's budget. Columbia executives reportedly watched this sequence in silent horror, one allegedly whispering, "We've financed a lunatic." Critics were baffled. Audiences stayed away. Arthur Penn and Warren Beatty's next collaboration, Bonnie and Clyde, which revolutionized American cinema. Mickey 1 was quietly forgotten, despite containing virtually every stylistic innovation that would make Bonnie and Clyde a sensation 2 years later. The film's fragmented narrative and existential dread feel shockingly contemporary. David Lynch has cited it as a major influence, particularly on Mulholland Drive. In an era of increasing surveillance, Mickey 1 asks questions about privacy, identity, and whether paranoia is sometimes justified that feel more urgent now than in 1965. 5. The Hill, 1965. 5 British soldiers are sent to a North African military prison during Libya. Their crime? Being human in an inhuman system. Sidney Lumet strips away everything but raw emotion in this brutal examination of power and resistance. Shot in stark black and white under the scorching Spanish sun doubling for Libya, the film centers on the hill, an artificial mound prisoners are forced to climb repeatedly until they break. Sean Connery, fresh from Goldfinger fame, deliberately destroys his suave image as a defiant prisoner, slowly being crushed by the system. Cinematographer Oswald Morris used innovative handheld techniques to create a documentary-like intensity. The 5-minute sequence of a prisoner's death, filmed in one unbroken take with no music, remains one of cinema's most harrowing moments. The cast endured brutal conditions during filming, with temperatures reaching 115 degrees. Connery later called it the most physically demanding role of my career. Critics recognized its brilliance, but audiences expecting James Bond stayed away. The film's unflinching portrayal of British military brutality made it politically radioactive in the UK. It received 0 BAFTA nominations despite universal critical acclaim. The Hill questions what happens when rigid systems encounter human complexity. It shows how power corrupts even decent men, and how resistance can be both futile and necessary. Lumet's film doesn't just examine military justice, it dissects the price of maintaining one's humanity in dehumanizing circumstances. 6. The Servant, 1963. A wealthy bachelor hires a manservant. Sounds boring, right? Wrong. This is the most disturbing power struggle ever committed to film. Joseph Lucy directs this psychological nightmare about class power and manipulation. Dirk Bogarde plays Barrett, a servant who gradually reverses roles with his employer, Tony, James Fox. What begins as a normal master-servant relationship transforms into something far more sinister, with Barrett slowly taking control of the house and Tony's psyche. Harold Pinter's screenplay is a masterclass in menace. Conversations drip with hidden meanings, silences stretch to breaking point. The Georgian townhouse becomes increasingly claustrophobic, with cinematographer Douglas Slocum using mirrors and shadows to create disorienting spaces where power dynamics visibly shift. The film's sexual politics were explosive for 1963. The homoerotic tension between Barrett and Tony shocked censors who demanded cuts. When Barrett introduces his sister, actually his lover, to seduce Tony, the resulting triangular relationship was too much for mainstream audiences. Critics recognized its brilliance but found it deeply uncomfortable. It swept the British Academy Awards but was barely released in America. Fox was so disturbed by his role that he suffered a nervous breakdown after filming, retreating from acting for nearly a decade. The Servant shows how power isn't taken by force. It's surrendered through 1,000 small compromises. Its examination of class warfare, psychological manipulation, and identity has influenced everything from Parasite to The Talented Mr. Ripley. This isn't just a film about a servant taking control. It's about how easily we become servants to our own desires. 7. Faces, 1968. A middle-aged businessman tells his wife he wants a divorce. What follows is cinema's most excruciating examination of a marriage's collapse, shot with the raw intensity of security camera footage. John Cassavetes mortgaged his house to finance this revolutionary independent film. Using 16mm cameras, natural lighting, and non-professional actors alongside professionals, he created something that felt less like a movie and more like spying on real people's private moments. The camera doesn't just observe, it intrudes, capturing every flinch, every false smile, every moment of drunken vulnerability. Gina Rowlands and John Marley deliver performances of such naked emotional honesty that watching feels almost voyeuristic. The infamous 18-minute scene of middle-aged people dancing, drinking, and desperately flirting wasn't scripted. Cassavetes simply gathered real people in a house and let the cameras roll for hours until defenses dropped. Hollywood executives reportedly walked out of screenings, calling it amateur garbage. One studio head allegedly said, "This isn't a movie, it's a home invasion." Despite this, it received 3 Oscar nominations, though the Academy refused to recognize Cassavetes' revolutionary editing techniques. Faces changed everything about American independent cinema. Its influence runs through films from Scorsese to Linklater to the Safdie brothers. By stripping away Hollywood artifice and refusing to flinch from human ugliness, Cassavetes didn't just make a movie about marriage, he forced audiences to confront the performance aspects of their own relationships. 8. Shock Corridor, 1963. A journalist commits himself to a mental hospital to solve a murder. Great plan, right? Until he starts going actually insane. Samuel Fuller, journalism veteran turned filmmaker, creates a lurid, hallucinatory descent into madness. The hospital becomes America itself, with patients representing the nation's buried traumas, racism, nuclear fear, brainwashing, and war. The journalist's investigation becomes secondary to Fuller's savage critique of a society driving itself mad. The film features some of the most striking imagery of the 1960s. A corridor suddenly floods with naked patients during a riot. A storm inside the hospital makes it rain in the hallways. Color sequences erupt within the black and white film, memories of the outside world that feel more surreal than the asylum itself. Fuller shot the film in just 10 days on a shoestring budget. The storm sequence was created using fire hoses from the studio lot. When the producer complained about the rising water-damaging equipment, Fuller allegedly replied, "The equipment will dry, the madness won't." Critics dismissed it as exploitation trash. Censors demanded cuts of the riot scenes. Fuller's unflinching portrayal of racism within the hospital, including a black patient who believes he's a founding member of the KKK, made distribution in southern states nearly impossible. Shock Corridor asks whether madness is individual or collective. It suggests that investigating insanity means risking your own sanity. Martin Scorsese later said, "Fuller didn't distinguish between art and journalism. He just wanted to hit you with the truth." This isn't just a film about a mental hospital. It's about a society unable to confront its own delusions. 9. Night of the Living Flesh Eaters, 1968. A group of strangers barricade themselves in a farmhouse while cannibalistic ghouls close in. You know this film, but not by this title. George Romero's original title for Night of the Living Dead was changed after distribution issues. Shot for $114,000 in rural Pennsylvania with a cast of unknown actors, this independent film redefined horror cinema forever. Romero didn't just create the modern zombie, he transformed horror from Gothic castles to American backyards. The film's documentary-style approach was revolutionary. Romero used techniques from his commercial filmmaking background, creating a newsreel quality that made the horror feel disturbingly real. The iconic scene where a young girl kills her mother with a trowel violated every taboo about children in horror films. The casting of Dwayne Jones, a black actor, as the protagonist wasn't intended as a political statement. He was simply the best. Actor available. Yet his character's fate at the film's conclusion, mistakenly shot by a white posse, took on profound racial significance when the film was released months after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. The film's most shocking element. Due to a copyright error, it immediately entered the public domain. Romero and his investors earned almost nothing from one of the most profitable independent films ever made. Estimates suggest it has earned over $30 million from various releases that Romero never saw a penny from. Night of the Living Dead transformed horror from entertainment to social commentary. Its ghouls weren't just monsters, they were mirrors reflecting American consumerism, racism, and violence. This isn't just a forgotten film about zombies, it's a revolutionary text that showed horror could be both terrifying and profound. 10. Targets, 1968. An aging horror icon's final public appearance is headed for a collision course with a random mass shooter. Peter Bogdanovich's directorial debut wasn't just shocking, it was prophetic. Boris Karloff, playing a version of himself, is an old-school horror star who feels obsolete in an era of real-life violence. Meanwhile, a clean-cut young man buys rifles, kisses his wife goodbye, and begins killing strangers from atop an oil tank. The film builds to their inevitable confrontation at a drive-in theater showing Karloff's films. Bogdanovich made the film under extraordinary constraints. Roger Corman gave the young director $130,000 with 3 conditions. Use footage from Karloff's previous film, complete filming in 2 days with Karloff, all the 81-year-old actor could manage due to severe arthritis and respiratory issues, and include enough violence to market as a horror film. Despite his health problems, Karloff worked extra days for free because he believed in the project. The scene where he confronts the shooter was filmed in 1 take, with Karloff in genuine physical pain throughout, adding to the scene's emotional weight. The film was completed just months before Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. were assassinated. Paramount, horrified by the timing, initially shelved it. When finally released, critics praised its artistic merits while expressing discomfort with its subject matter. Targets contrast theatrical horror with real-world violence in ways that feel disturbingly relevant today. Bogdanovich doesn't just tell a story about a mass shooter, he examines America's transition from Gothic fantasies to mundane nightmares. The film asks which is more frightening, monsters on screen or the boy next door with a rifle. 11. The Bedford Incident, 1965. A U.S. destroyer hunting a Soviet submarine in the Arctic. A captain obsessed with his prey. A crew pushed to breaking point. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. James B. Harris directs this taut Cold War thriller that dared to imagine nuclear confrontation without a last-minute rescue. Richard Widmark plays Captain Finlander, a man determined to force a Soviet submarine to surface, regardless of consequences. Sidney Poitier is the journalist who watches the captain's obsession drive the ship toward disaster. The film's claustrophobic atmosphere is achieved through remarkable technical precision. Shot on a real destroyer with naval cooperation, the cramped quarters and technical jargon create overwhelming authenticity. The tension builds through small details, sweating faces, tapping fingers, whispering crewmen, rather than dramatic action. What separated The Bedford Incident from other Cold War thrillers was its courage to follow its premise to its logical conclusion. The devastating final scene, which I won't spoil, violated audience expectations for American military films. Navy officials who had supported production were reportedly furious with the finished product. Released the same year as The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, it was overshadowed by that film's star power and literary pedigree. Critics praised its craftsmanship, but found its message too bleak for mainstream audiences looking for reassurance during the Cold War. The film's unflinching examination of military psychology, the dangers of obsession, and how easily miscalculation could lead to catastrophe feels chillingly relevant in any era of international tension. This isn't just a thriller about submarine hunting, it's about how easily human error can trigger apocalypse. 12. Failsafe, 1964. American bombers receive erroneous orders to nuke Moscow. The equipment meant to recall them fails. The president must make an unthinkable choice to prevent full-scale nuclear war. Sidney Lumet creates unbearable tension without a single action sequence. The drama unfolds in 3 claustrophobic locations: the president's bunker, the Strategic Air Command Center, and the lead bomber's cockpit. Henry Fonda's president must negotiate with the Soviet premier, while American pilots follow orders that will trigger Armageddon. The film. Technical accuracy terrified government officials. Several Air Force consultants withdrew from the project when they realized how accurately it portrayed nuclear command vulnerabilities. The Pentagon refused any cooperation, forcing the production to create convincing military sets from scratch. The film's release was catastrophically timed. Columbia Pictures delayed it to avoid competing with Dr. Strangelove, which covered similar material through satire. By the time Failsafe reached theaters, audiences had already processed nuclear anxiety through Kubrick's dark comedy, making Lumet's dead-serious approach feel redundant. Eugene Burdick and Harvey Wheeler, authors of the source novel, were sued by Red Alert author Peter George for plagiarism. The case was settled out of court, but added to the film's troubled production history. Failsafe stands as cinema's most realistic portrayal of how nuclear war might begin, not through evil intent, but through mechanical failure and human error. Its clinical examination of how rational people implement irrational systems remains profoundly disturbing. This isn't just a thriller about preventing war, it's about the moral mathematics of choosing which millions will die. 13. The Chase, 1966. A small Texas town erupts into violence when an escaped convict heads home. Directed by Arthur Penn, this star-studded drama about corruption, racism, and mob mentality was too truthful for 1960s audiences. Marlon Brando plays Sheriff Calder, a decent man trying to maintain order as the town descends into chaos. Robert Redford is the escaped prisoner, whose return threatens to expose the town's secrets. Jane Fonda, E.G. Marshall, and Robert Duvall round out an extraordinary cast portraying a community rotting from within. Producer Sam Spiegel notoriously interfered with Penn's direction, creating behind-the-scenes tension that mirrored the film's content. Penn later claimed Spiegel re-edited the film against his wishes, particularly softening the brutal beating Brando's character receives from townspeople, though the scene remains shocking even in its compromised form. The film's portrayal of Southern racism, corruption, and violence was considered so inflammatory that theaters in several Southern states refused to show it. Lillian Hellman's screenplay, adapted from Horton Foote's play, presented small-town America not as a refuge from urban problems, but as their source. Released during escalating Vietnam protests and civil rights conflicts, The Chase hit too close to home. Critics found it melodramatic. Audiences found it disturbing. It lost millions at the box office despite its star power. The Chase examines how quickly civilization crumbles when fear takes hold. Its portrayal of how wealth insulates the powerful from consequences, while the vulnerable bear the brunt of social breakdown, feels increasingly relevant. This isn't just a forgotten film about a manhunt. It's a prophecy about American division that we're still living through. 14. The Pawnbroker, 1964. A Holocaust survivor runs a pawn shop in Harlem, emotionally dead inside until confronted with the suffering around him. Sidney Lumet's unflinching examination of trauma shocked audiences and changed American cinema forever. Rod Steiger delivers a devastating performance as Sol Nazerman, a man who survived the camps but lost his soul in the process. His emotional walls begin cracking when he recognizes parallels between Nazi Germany and the systemic oppression in his Harlem neighborhood. Steiger reportedly isolated himself for weeks before filming, losing weight and studying Holocaust footage to capture Nazerman's hollow physicality. The film broke Hollywood's production code with America's first sustained nudity in a mainstream film, a flashback showing Nazerman's wife in a concentration camp brothel. Censors demanded cuts. Lumet refused. After unprecedented appeals, the code was revised, beginning its eventual collapse. Several major theater chains still banned the film despite the ruling. Cinematographer Boris Kaufman, who shot On the Waterfront, created a visual language of trauma using extreme close-ups of eyes and hands, jarring flashbacks triggered by everyday sounds, and compositions that isolate Nazerman within crowded frames. The jazz score by Quincy Jones deliberately subverts expectations, avoiding sentimental cues during emotional moments. The film was wildly divisive. Some Jewish organizations worried it would stir anti-Semitism. Others praised its unflinching portrayal of Holocaust trauma. Black community leaders both criticized and defended its depiction of Harlem. It lost money despite critical acclaim, with Paramount barely promoting it due to controversy. The Pawnbroker was the first American film to deal directly with Holocaust survivor trauma. Its innovations in depicting flashbacks and psychological fragmentation influenced generations of filmmakers. This isn't just a forgotten film about a key. Pawnbroker. It's a landmark that forced American audiences to confront both Holocaust horrors and systemic racism when most preferred comfortable denial. 15. The Incident, 1967. Two thugs terrorize passengers on a late-night New York subway car. No one fights back. No one helps each other. For 90 minutes, we watch ordinary people fail the most basic moral test. Larry Pierce directs this brutal examination of urban apathy with documentary-like intensity. The film unfolds in real time, trapping viewers with the victims. Martin Sheen, in his film debut, and Tony Musante play the tormentors with terrifying authenticity, methodically breaking down each passenger's dignity. The film was shot on an actual subway car purchased by the production after the transit authority refused cooperation, finding the script too negative. Cinematographer Gerald Hirschfeld created innovative lighting rigs to shoot in the confined space, achieving noir-like shadows in documentary conditions. The MPAA initially gave it an X rating for its portrayal of realistic violence and threats. Several major theater chains refused to show it, considering its portrayal of New York too negative for commercial appeal. Many critics dismissed it as exploitation, missing its profound moral questions. The film's unflinching examination of the bystander effect, how easily people rationalize inaction during crisis, feels more relevant with each passing year. Each passenger represents a different social type. The military man, the homosexual couple, the bickering spouses, the alcoholic, all failing to unite against common threat. The Incident asks uncomfortable questions about collective responsibility and moral courage. It suggests that civilization is a thin veneer easily stripped away by fear. This isn't just a thriller about subway terrorism. It's about how social atomization makes us vulnerable to those willing to violate social contracts. 15 forgotten films that changed cinema forever, each one buried for being too honest, too challenging, or too ahead of its time. Which of these lost classics shocked you the most? Would you have walked out of shock corridor like those 1960s audiences or stayed until the bitter end? Drop your thoughts below. Remember, the films that truly change us are rarely the ones that make us comfortable. They're the ones that force us to question everything we thought we knew. What modern films do you think are being deliberately forgotten today because they hit too close to home?